Hey there, how's it going today everyone? We have a lot of Onimusha related news to cover, from the 5th trailer, new weekly memos, a demo, pre-orders, as well as the announcement of Onimusha Dawn of Dreams being added to the PlayStation Classic catalog. So without any further delays, let's get right into it. It was last year that I speculated what could happen with the future of HD remasters within this franchise, and Onimusha Dawn of Dreams was a game that I thought could potentially end up as a classic catalog release due to the game's lack of success and popularity. Well, it's actually happening, and I have to be completely honest, I didn't expect it to turn out to be true. The question now though is, what does that mean for the other games within the franchise? Well, I think that we'll still get the remasters of Onimusha 3, Blade Warriors Tactics, and even Dawn of Dreams, because there have been other games that have ended up on the classic catalog before that have ended up being remastered or had their remasters ported. For example, the original Grandia was on the classic catalog before the HD collection was ported to PlayStation, or another example would be the original Legacy of Kain Defiance, which was also put on the catalog last year before the release of the remaster earlier this year. Granted, these games come from two different companies, but I do think that in the case of Dawn of Dreams, Capcom would still consider remastering the game, especially when they made a VR game based around it last year at an exclusive event in Japan. In all honesty, I think this would be the best move on their end too, because it would give fans a chance to experience the vanilla game, albeit with the ability to have save states and a rewind feature, and then later down the line, should a remastered version be released, experiencing the same game, although with some quality of life improvements and potentially some new content not seen in that original version. One thing that I am curious about though is that if this release will have trophies at all, since most of Capcom's classic catalog releases don't seem to have them. Maybe Dawn of Dreams could be the first one, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. I do wish that we could have gotten 3 as well, or even Blade Warriors, but either way, I'm glad that we're getting more Onimusha than we originally anticipated. Anyway, before we move on to the Way of the Sword demo, I thought it'd be neat to compare these small bits of footage in the trailer with footage of the game running on the PS2 being upscaled to 1440p. Hey, so I recorded this part of the video before the release of the PlayStation Classic catalog of Onimusha Dawn of Dreams, so instead of comparing the trailer footage, I thought it'd be best to show off the footage from the actual game on the PS5 in comparison to the original PS2 release. One thing that I have noticed with this game, although I'm sure it's the case with other PS2 games on the catalog, is that it looks fine, but in menus it looks similar to what you would expect to see with a PS2 game being upscaled using the RetroTink 5X Pro or something similar to it. I thought it was something that I should throw out there. Also, I'm not entirely sure, but it does seem like the game is more responsive, but that could just be me. One last thing that I forgot to mention about Dawn of Dreams is that there is unfortunately no trophy support for this release. It kinda sucks. I really wish they would have added some trophies, but it is what it is.
One has fallen without realizing his final hope. One has fallen clinging to his fate. One has fallen leaving the fate of the future to his companions. History is riddled with the waves of destruction and rebirth. These waves roll onward far into the future. Much has been destroyed. Many have perished. Genma into the world once again. A man wielding two tremendous broadswords has appeared with a mission to hunt the Genma down. He cuts down any of the vicious Genma and burns down all of the twisted cherry trees that he finds. He fights like the Oni and leaves a swath of great cherry trees in his path. So he has received the name Oni of the Ash. Inspiring all reminiscent of the Oni, he cuts through darkness with his gigantic blades, showing his enemy no mercy. Why does he fight? What drives him to burn the cherry trees down? Nobody knows.
Not quite.
Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the new demo for Onimusha Way of the Sword. This demo is largely the same as the one from the Gamescom build that I played last year, however there's a few differences between the two. Firstly, unlike the Gamescom build, we have the ability to select difficulty. This has been somewhat of a hot topic within the community because despite the option being available, there are many people, both fans and newcomers alike, that feel that the game is too easy. Keep in mind that this was a common criticism even back during Gamescom before difficulties were even made available. In my personal opinion, I still stand by my take that I made in my initial impressions of the game, in that I believe that the game feels a little slow and that the enemies were a little too passive, so in my opinion it could use something like a turbo mode, which could potentially address this issue. However, let's assume that we never gain a turbo mode, and hypothetically Capcom is okay with the way that the difficulty is now. What then? Well, in Capcom's defense, this is an early portion of the game, and we have yet to see any more difficult enemies or areas within the game, not to mention that Onimusha as a franchise has always technically meant to be a casual friendly experience. For all we know, the full release might have a hard mode available from the start, or at the very least after an initial playthrough, and that's not even taking into account the potential challenge modes like critical and hell modes, for instance. Keeping that in mind though, Capcom did also acknowledge the critiques regarding the difficulty in the Capcom Spotlight, which we'll go over later on in the video. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that for too long, so let's move on to some of the other new things within the demo. The second difference is that we have two control schemes to select, aggressive and defensive. Technically speaking, the default control scheme in the Gamescom build was the defensive one, and that's the one that I ended up sticking with, although I will say that I would have liked a control scheme that was closer to the classic games, or at the very least the ability to fully customize the control scheme. Hopefully in the full release that will be something that we can do, but only time will tell on that one. The last difference in the demo is that we have a few new areas to explore, and this is actually tied to a few new things or changes that they made to this build. To go over them briefly, we have save mirrors in the demo, a new enemy type, as well as a few new consumable items, and we actually have to go out of our way to find the two celestials in this build. One thing that I didn't mind being changed about the save mirrors is that they will heal you upon interacting with them, and they act as a storehouse for any additional items that you pick up along the way. While it wasn't possible in this build of the demo, upgrading is still done through the save mirrors. However, as it's been shown by many other news outlets at this point, the upgrade system has been reworked, requiring things like materials or even magic and power jewels, which have been renamed to magic and power stones respectively. Speaking of which, I'm fairly certain that in the Gamescom build, Musashi was upgraded to some degree because his soul absorption speed has been toned down quite significantly. I think what we've seen both in previous trailers as well as that build of the game, he was likely upgraded to the maximum potential of that ability, but the current demo we have at home is likely been set to level 1. We still don't know if the game will have any accessories that can increase the overall speed of soul absorption either, but if the charms are anything to go by, they might have the ability to increase certain stats just by a small amount. We'll talk about the charms and other pre-order bonuses in just a moment though. Before we do, I did want to go over some of the other gameplay mechanics as well, starting with ESINs. I actually need to correct myself from what I said during my Gamescom interview with Capcom. I mentioned that dodging at just the right moment and then attacking would land you an ESIN, and that's actually incorrect. Sort of. To elaborate, we still have our standard method of ESIN attack where you hit the attack button at just the right moment before an enemy attack lands. However, the reason I assumed it functioned like an evade ESIN from previous entries is because the animation for your standard ESIN attack looks similar to an evade animation in this game. At first glance, it would be easy to assume that that's what you need to do, but it's not the case. It's simply just the standard ESIN. What has changed, albeit slightly, is how the chain ESINs work. So you have two types of chain ESINs. The first requiring you to do some posture damage to multiple enemies and then simply pressing the attack button each time the camera pans over to the next enemy. If you perform a standard ESIN on an enemy that doesn't have posture damage while there's one that does, Musashi can do a chain ESIN on the enemy with said posture damage. As far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to be a cap on takedown ESINs for Genma with posture damage, but I have seen as many as 5 be taken down by this variation, but I'm not sure if it can go higher since enemies can recover quickly. The second type works similarly to the previous game's chain ESINs by rapidly pressing the attack button at just the right moment to continue the chain, although it does at times seem like you need to hold the attack button for just a moment to trigger the chain ESIN, but I'm not sure which is more consistent. This will cause the game to highlight the next enemy with the lock-on icon in red before continuing with the attack. I'd like to point out with this one that I'm not exactly sure if you can change which enemy gets targeted next, although I have noticed that you can hold off on a chain ESIN, and I'm going to assume that might be because you'll have the ability to target specific enemies during your chain ESINs later on in the game. For example, in a part of the demo where you have to fight a large amount of enemies, you may want to optimize the chain ESIN to focus on the Togemaru over the Hitosumegasa. Also, with this style of chain ESIN, the cap in the demo is 3 enemies, but we have seen in one of the previous trailers that Musashi has done a chain ESIN with at least 4 enemies. However, we still don't really know what the maximum amount is in the full game. Based on some of the preview footage that's been going around, it does look like we'll be upgrading the abilities in a similar fashion to Onimusha Dawn of Dreams, so I'm going to assume there's going to be something in relation to the ESINs there. One thing that I'm not so sure about is if doing an ESIN with a two-handed attack will cause more damage to bosses or not. The only thing that I have noticed with two-handed attacks is that to initiate an ESIN, the timing is very slightly different, but that's about it. However, the thing that I did notice with two-handed attacks is that whenever you perform a break ESIN or stealth takedown, despite the game showing the prompt for a one-handed attack, you can use a two-handed attack just fine. My assumption is that because this is an early part of the game, you have to rely on one-handed attacks to do most of these actions, but later on, as the game progresses, they might have enemies or bosses that require you to press the two-handed attack button for these actions to go through. They may also mix up these prompts in the middle of combat, but that's yet to be seen. Evasions do have a special counterattack which requires you to fill up the gauge on the bottom right. In order for you to fill up that gauge, you just have to evade a few times at just the right moment. The counterattack itself allows you to get about 2 or 3 hits on an enemy. There is also the burst form which fills up whenever you parry enough times, and that does give you a damage boost that will stack with your counter and ESIN attacks. Now, in case if you weren't aware, you do get a charm for the full game after beating the demo, and that is the Kubiakari charm. It's unknown if the charms will have any special effects, but if the information regarding the pre-order bonuses on the official website is anything to go by, it probably will. At the moment, we have 6 total charms that we can get by pre-ordering the game, if we include the unlockable charm from the demo, and these are the Lion Dog charm, the White Monkey charm, the Oni Lady charm, the Little Dance charm, as well as the Mentor charm. We also have a handful of cosmetics available. For the standard edition, you'll get the Sealed Curse sword appearance, and for the deluxe edition, you'll receive the White Lion sword appearance. You'll also get the red armor for Musashi, the Ryzen, Enryu, Whittled Ore, and Bamboo and Panda sword appearances, along with the Crimson Lotus Gauntlet. Also, with the premium edition, you'll receive cosmetics for the Oni Lady and Okuni. These are Bird Call, Snow Camellia, Elegance, Flower Dance, Goldfish Dance, and Oni Dance. Finally, in terms of cosmetics for Musashi, we get 3 additional Haori called Hellfire, Moonlight, and Cloudbiter. Also included in the premium edition is a mini digital soundtrack with 5 total tracks which can be accessed through the game's main menu. And before we continue on with my thoughts of the cosmetics, I did want to read off the descriptions for all of the items. Lion Dog, a charm modeled after a lion dog, an item that grants a special effect when equipped. Sealed Curse, an item that changes the appearance of Miyamoto Musashi's swords. It is said that something sinister is sealed within, but in truth, the only thing sinister about the blades are their look. White Monkey, a charm modeled after an auspicious white monkey, an item that grants a special effect when equipped. White Lion, an item that changes the appearance of Miyamoto Musashi's swords, embodying the beauty and majesty of a white lion. These blades embolden those who wield them. Bird Call, a crane and crow, gazes fiercely aloft. What could be the significance of this design? Snow Camellia. Like a snow camellia blooming within the most frigid of winters, one can sense from this woman a strength of will capable of overcoming any adversity. Elegance. Those who lay eyes on it cannot help but be drawn by its solemn beauty. Flower Dance. An eye-catching garment perfect for performing on stage. Prepare to be dazzled by the kabuki dance sensation that has the capital enthralled. Let the show begin. Goldfish Dance, a splendid peach-colored outfit. Okuni seems to feel slightly embarrassed wearing it, wondering if it suits her at all. Oni Dance, a crimson garment worn with vivid makeup that conjures the image of an oni dancing among flames. Witness a dance of power and grace that strikes fear into the heart of man and Genma alike. Hellfire, reminiscent of raging fires of hell. It is fitting attire for one charged with sending the Genma back to hell's depths. Moonlight, a haori left behind by the departed Oni, inspired by the beauty of the moon as seen from the capital. Cloudbiter, depicting a magnificent dragon piercing through clouds. The striking design of this haori was said to have stirred the morale of firefighters who wore it on duty. For the mini soundtrack, a mini soundtrack featuring 5 tracks including the main theme that capture the atmosphere of the game's setting. Red Armor. Striking red armor that can only be worn by an unparalleled warrior such as Musashi. Ryzen. Thought by some to be imbued with the power of lightning, but besides their shocking design, they are ordinary blades. Enryu. Thought by some to be imbued with the power of fire, but besides their intimidating design, they are ordinary blades. Whittled Ore. An ore whittled down to a wooden sword. A simple weapon, but in the hands of Musashi, it could easily shatter someone's skull. Bamboo and Panda. Despite being crafted from bamboo, Musashi wields these blades with no reservations. The panda clinging onto the sheath adds a cute touch. Oni Lady, a beautiful charm modeled after the Oni Lady. Little Dancer, a charm modeled after the dancer famous in the capital. Mentor, a charm modeled after a mighty swordsman who serves as a mentor to Miyamoto Musashi. Crimson Lotus, the ghoulish design conjures images of fierce crimson flames that will devour all. I really like all of the cosmetics. I think they look fantastic, and I love that there's a sword that's in reference to 2 of Samanosuke's costumes from Onimusha Warlords and Onimusha 3 Demon Siege. I love that we have a redesigned Ryzen and Enryu through skins, although I wish we could have gotten skins in reference to Shippu and the Bishaman sword, along with the possibility of skins that are in reference to some of the other weapons throughout the series, especially Samanosuke's weapons from Onimusha 3, because I think they would fit so well for Musashi in this game. When I mentioned that on X, I had a few people try to argue with me that weapons like Shippu or the Bishaman sword shouldn't be skins because the Wind Whipper was essentially like Shippu, and that there'd probably be an ultimate weapon equivalent by the end of the game in regards to the Bishaman sword. However, my counterpoint to that is that firstly, in Onimusha Blade Warriors, both Shippu and Senpumaru were wielded as individual weapons called True Shippu and True Senpumaru, which Musashi could dual wield those weapons and then they would become known as Suzukaze. Secondly, I was not, nor am I asking for them to bring it in as a DLC Oni weapon in the game. I'm simply pointing out that it was a missed opportunity to include specific DLC weapon cosmetics that would make the standard sword look like those weapons, not make them function like those weapons like some people think Tsushima did. Lastly, even if Capcom's logic behind it was, well, bringing in a skin based on Shippu is redundant because we have the Wind Whipper and that exists as a weapon, why are we assuming that Capcom couldn't do weapon skins for the Oni weapons themselves? In my honest opinion, I think that if Capcom really wanted to, they could give us skins based on all of Samanosuke's weapons. For instance, since we already have Ryzen and Enryu skins for the standard sword, I could see the Bishaman sword and Kuga also be cosmetics for the standard sword, while the 2 Celestials could be made to look like Tenso, The Wind Whipper, as mentioned earlier, could be made to look like Shippu, and the Earth Shakers could be made to look like Chigo. Most of Jubei's weapons would work as well for the standard sword with either Buraito or the Eureka Ken, and for the Oni weapons Senpumaru or Dokotsui. Really the only weapon from Jubei that could pose an issue as a weapon skin would be Hyojin Yari, but if we wanted to expand this argument a little bit further, Jacques and Soki could also pose certain issues with their respective weapons because Soki specifically uses broadswords and Jacques uses whips. Now, as of me recording this video, Musashi has 6 weapons, but we've only seen 3 of them. None of them seem to be based on a broadsword, spear, or whip. Anyway, I don't mean to go on such a tangent about this, but it did annoy me to see that there are people that look at things like this in such a closed-minded way when the possibilities are there and Capcom could easily capitalize on them. Because even though I do like the other sword skins that we've gotten so far, I think I would have swapped out at minimum Sealed Curse, White Lion, Whittled Ore, and/or Bamboo and Panda in favor of those skins that I would have preferred to see. As I mentioned before, I really do like all these cosmetics, but I think something like the Whittled Ore would make far more sense as a post-game unlock or a weapon that you would get by the very end of the game, especially if you're aware of how the real-life Musashi defeated Kojiro. For all we know, they might add in additional DLC for the Oni weapons or through patches, however that currently remains to be seen. On a more positive note, I really dig the red armor for Musashi, although it does seem that this costume won't function the same way as the cosmetics that director Nihei had mentioned in a previous interview, where certain costumes will also change the appearance of the sword, assuming that quote wasn't mistranslated. The costumes for the Oni Lady and Akuni are also really nice. I quite like the Elegance and Oni Dance costumes for each character respectively. One thing that confuses me a bit though is why Musashi only has one pre-order costume as opposed to these other 2 characters, and why characters like Ono or Kojiro don't have any pre-order costumes as a part of the bonus. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it would have been nice to see. And as for the charms, I don't know if I'll use any specific charm, but they do mention that they strengthen Musashi's abilities, they just don't go into detail. I would like the option to make the charms invisible if possible, since we do know that they will physically appear on Musashi, but that's just a personal preference of mine. The Crimson Lotus Gauntlet is neat, I just don't know how often I'll use it. I will say though that it probably will go well with the red armor. I'm just hoping that there's going to be some better looking armor that it'll go well with, because I think it will somewhat conflict with the overall design. But that's just me. Speaking of the gauntlet, I am hoping that there's going to be gauntlet skins. I'm kind of surprised they didn't make Samanosuke's gauntlet a pre-order skin, but maybe that's something you can unlock. One last thing that I'd like to bring up is that Capcom notes in the fine print of the website is that you'll be able to change the appearance through the spirit mirrors, and the appearance tab will unlock through the standard game progression. I'm not sure if that means you'll get to change the appearance right off the bat for your sword and costume, but maybe it means that once you get the Oni Gauntlet, you'll have to get to a certain point and then it'll unlock. But we'll have to find out by launch. And now it's time to get into the thing that I think most of you are probably here for, the 5th trailer breakdown. However, we're not just going to be breaking down the 5th trailer, we're also going to be going over the Switch 2 announcement trailer, as well as the Severing Fates and Curious Cases trailers. So let's get right into it. If you remember from the last trailer where Musashi said to Kojiro, "Get a hold of yourself, are you man or a beast?" The 5th trailer opens up with Kojiro's response. Does it matter? A beast isn't far from an Oni, you know. And that's followed up by the mysterious voice which says, "You'd do well to follow his example." And then immediately we hear Ono say, "I thought you'd see the appeal, Musashi," before Musashi swings his sword. I think this scene is actually within Rokudochinoji Temple, since from here we can see that Musashi's all on his own, intensely focusing on the things that other characters have said to him. Anyway, it cuts to the next point where we see a Hitotsume Gasa beating a taiko drum while other Genma nearby are feasting. We also see a human woman pouring what I assume is sake for a large human-like figure. I'll get back to him in just a moment when we get a clearer shot of him. The trailer cuts into some gameplay where we see Musashi running alongside a mountain path. This location is Mount Oe, with a fortress that is under the control of a Genma named Shutendoji. One of the things that I absolutely love about this shot in the trailer is that it feels very reminiscent to the beginning of Onimusha Warlords. Even some of the surrounding areas leading up to the fortress, at least the ones that we see in the trailer, also feel very similar in that regard. Even though Capcom has repeatedly stated that there are no connections to the old games, I've never believed that to be true. In a recent interview with Game Informer, director Nihei stated the following: "So there's no kind of direct connection to the old games in the world world of Onimusha Wave the Sword, but we've tried to pay homage to some of the elements from those older games. So some of the enemies you'll see, for instance, are based on some of the older enemies, that's so fans of the series have something they can touch base with. The key words here are there's no direct connection to the old games, but in my opinion that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't any connections at all. While I have speculated on the possibility of a character like Samanosuke to return in some way in previous videos, that's all it ever was in the grand scheme of things, speculation. Going off of what we know so far, plus the key wording of this statement, I think we'll see two things. Firstly, references or nods to the old games in the forms of enemies, locations, characters, and weapons, and secondly, references to the old games and characters through notes and dialogue. I'd also like to point out that Capcom has, with some of their other franchises like Resident Evil, or an even better example, Devil May Cry, kept their old games canon and would vaguely reference something about those games via notes or dialogue, as well as having enemies return in some form or another. And also, let's not forget that at one point they did have a statement on the official website that alluded to the gauntlet originally being Samanosuke's rather than an original gauntlet for Musashi specifically. The reason I'm talking about this is because I still see people say that Wave of the Sword is a full-on reboot, but I don't think that's the case, otherwise somebody from the development team would have already said so by this point. Apparently, director Nihei also contradicted the claim in a separate interview by claiming that the game does have some connections to the old games, but this is all he had to say on the matter. This is an unusual title set in an unusual world with some connections to the original titles from Onimusha 1 through 4. In creating this title and its new setting and world, we wanted to create something that would appeal to a wide range of players, so there are some new elements to the storytelling this time. Unfortunately, we can't go into that right now, but we hope you'll look forward to finding out when it releases. In my opinion, you wouldn't really say something like that if the game was a reboot now, would you? I don't mean to dwell on it too much, but it is something that I wanted to talk about while going over this part of the trailer, since it does feel like a callback to the original Onimusha to some degree. To get back to the trailer, Musashi says, "That castle on the mountain," it almost implies he already knows about it or has been told about it prior, or maybe he's even been there before. From here, we see some combat and hear the Oni lady say, "Musashi, I sense Genma," and we see a glimpse of one of the new enemy types known as the Oboro Garasu. The website description has the following to say about them. A winged ninja-like Genma variant. They watch Musashi's every move, striking when an opening presents itself. Oboro Garasu employ deadly combination attacks when paired with another. A moment's inattentiveness often marks the end of their quarry's life. So these enemies will require you to pay attention to your surroundings, since they will dart around in any given area that you face them in, as shown in the trailer. Even the Oni lady mentions that no ordinary Genma can move like them. One other thing that I'd like to point out is that we do have an actual name for her this time around. The Oni lady's true name is Shizuka, which has been mentioned across a few articles, and I believe it has been shown off in a couple of the gameplay previews that have been floating around as well. However, the website hasn't updated any information regarding her name, and Capcom hasn't mentioned it outright either, likely to prevent spoiling players looking to go in blind. Anyway, Shizuka continues to say that she doubts the area is meant to welcome visitors, and we see Musashi perform a new ability known as Oni Agility. On the website, it says, "An Oni power that imbues one's legs with an explosive potential to open up new paths, grants Musashi the ability to carry out acrobatic feats such as running along certain walls that aid in both battle and exploration." Additionally, more of that ability we saw in the 4th trailer gets shown off here, and we recently got an update on the website for the name of the ability, which is called Oni Strength. The website description reads as follows: "An Oni power that imbues one's arms with inhuman strength that can turn the tide of battle. Powerful strikes fueled by this power can break through enemy defenses with ease. The power's strength also serves Musashi well during exploration." I'm really interested to see how these abilities work during gameplay, since they're separate from the Oni form that gets teased later on in the trailer. Speaking of Oni forms, let's talk about the boss that we'll get that form from. We see Musashi and Shizuka standing across the room from Shuten Doji, who's drinking this huge bowl of sake. We hear Shizuka mention that the castle's owner, likely Shuten, is terribly cautious, where it then cuts to Shuten Doji introducing himself. This is what the website has to say about Shuten Doji. A large Genma found within a fortress atop Mount Oe, whose heinous acts know no bounds. Legends tell of an Oni by the same name, but could there be some connection here? Well, aside from the description of him, there are a few things that point to those connections. Firstly, we can see on his right hand there is a sort of gauntlet or metallic glove that he's wearing that has a symbol of an eye and not an organic one like Musashi, Kojiro, or Ono with their respective gauntlets. Also around his neck he's wearing this rope which has similarities to the gauntlet and the dragon orb or eye that's typically associated with the Oni. Lastly, his sword and gourd both have symbols with eyes on them, giving a clear indication that he was an Oni. It's likely that at some point he became a Genma, either forcefully or willingly, but we'll have to see if the story or any of the notes within the game clarify this. Also, Shuten happens to know of Musashi, and as he gets up to start battling him, he says, "The fool who seeks strength, yet rejects the power of the Oni." So he already knows that Musashi actively hates using the power he's been given. I really like the arena for the boss battle here, having the lesser Genma just stand by watching this battle as their form of entertainment, not to mention the lighting and the colors in this area are just very pleasant to look at. From the looks of things, Shuten Doji looks like he's going to be a very tough boss to deal with due to his size and range of attacks, since he can use fire to his advantage. We do hear him say to Musashi when he pulls off a fire attack, "You shame yourself, child," like he's looking down at Musashi for rejecting the power, or that he's completely naive of the power he is rejecting. He also has the power of wind, which he can use to bring Musashi closer to himself to deal a very powerful attack, and while this is happening within the trailer, he shouts, "Witness my might." The trailer cuts to where we saw Kojiro in the fourth trailer absorbing what appeared to be a human soul, but this time we see him slashing at Musashi relentlessly, and in the background, Ono says, "If you live by the sword, fighting is everything. So you've lost. Will you swap the sword for a trowel?" Musashi responds with, "Like hell I will." And I assume they're talking about Kojiro because shortly after showing Musashi being surrounded by yellow souls in a different location, he's lying around on the ground in the same place where he was fighting Kojiro at. Anyway, Ono says, "No? What then? Are you going to start taking human souls?" And Musashi, likely in anger, stating, "If human souls are what it takes." This part of the trailer really focuses on Musashi's defeat and struggle after this particular duel with Kojiro, which I find really interesting. I'm assuming that Kojiro is gaining strength in a really unnatural way by relying on human souls, and Musashi, likely really angry about the loss, is trying to figure out a way to beat him without relying on tactics like that. Shizuka also starts to speak, saying, "Musashi, if that's the path he walks, then I will follow." And we get this close-up shot of the gauntlet and the dragon orb within glowing. We also get a close-up of Shizuka's hand, and she continues to say, "I've chosen to trust Musashi's judgment in all matters." I wonder what she means by that exactly, but we'll have to wait and see how this turns out in the full release. We then see Musashi stand up with his sword, and then another close-up of his gauntlet, this time focusing on the dragon orb glowing even more intensely than before, and he says, "Oni departed, give me every ounce of power that you have in return." And as he's saying that, he transforms into his Oni form before the trailer cuts to the title. We also hear Okuni say, "Then get going, Onimusha," before the trailer ends with Musashi doing a powered up attack. There's a few things that I'd like to point out here. His hair is red instead of white, and also in previous entries, it varied based on how the characters obtained their true Oni forms. In the first game, Samanosuke died, and his blood making contact with his gauntlet caused this form to awaken by the end of the game. In the second game, after obtaining the 5 sacred orbs, stating the virtues of those orbs and doing certain hand gestures allowed Jubei to awaken his true Oni form. In Onimusha 3, the Samanosuke of the original timeline merged with the version of himself from the new timeline by using the power of both gauntlets. And in Dawn of Dreams, Soki wore Samanosuke's Oni gauntlet to awaken his true Oni form. Here it seems that Musashi will obtain his true Oni form after defeating Shuten Doji and taking his powers from him. Aside from the red hair, which matches Shuten's, we can also barely see the boss arena in the background, but it's heavily obscured by all the effects in blue fire. And that's the 5th trailer. Now originally this trailer showed us a release date for September 25th, however Capcom has since updated the release date for the game and it is now coming out on September 4th, which is really exciting that we'll be able to play this game much sooner than originally expected. Up next we have the Switch 2 gameplay overview trailer. I'm not going to go over the entire trailer since most of it is about gameplay aspects we already know about. I did, however, want to go over some of the new bits of footage not seen before this trailer. The first thing that we see is Musashi performing an Isen while his sword is in burst form on a Byakwe in an unfamiliar part of Kyoto that we haven't seen before. I suspect this might be in a later portion of the game since the sky is red and the environment is very distorted. Next up, we have a clip of parrying, but interestingly enough, it highlights a brand new location and boss. I'll talk more about the boss and location when we get to the Severing Fates trailer, since the trailer itself is based on this particular segment. Anyway, we have the next portion showing off the deflect mechanic with a Chijiko in Dokyo's lab, as well as 2 Kubiakari. I wasn't able to deflect multiple projectiles at once consistently as shown in the footage here, mostly because I haven't been able to really get the timing down, but it is possible in the demo, and I do wonder if that ability can be further enhanced as we play the game. Next, they show us how the Isens work with more footage of the Daidara boss fight in the Oni Refuge, which is the location that was featured in the second trailer. We also see more footage of various locations of Kyoto, with this portion ending off with a chain Isen. That's followed by the Oni Armament segment of the trailer, where it focuses on 3 of the 6 weapons that we've seen so far: the 2 Celestials, the Earth Shakers, and the Wind Whipper. We'll talk more about the unknown weapons in just a moment, but to get back to this trailer, we have a few more new locations not seen before, and then we get a segment focusing on the Switch 2 motion controls, but it's nothing significant. That's everything from the Switch 2 overview trailer, and now we have our next video to go over, which is the Capcom Spotlight overview from June. For the most part, the information that they go over in the Spotlight isn't new because it's meant to get anyone unaware up to date with the latest information on the game. What we do have is some new gameplay footage and some quick glimpses of cutscenes showing off some new locations in the game. First up, we have what looks like the street leading up to the Greater Nue boss fight, and we could see some lightning striking parts of the environment along the way. Next, we have more of that boss and area that we saw beforehand. I'm still going to hold off on talking about these in depth until we get to the Severing Fate trailer, but we do have a name for this location, and that's the Yasui Konpiragu Shrine. The main focus of the Spotlight was Capcom acknowledging the criticism of the game feeling too easy, so we get a look at a brand new enemy type known as Dohatsuten, and something to keep in mind here is that this is a boss as seen in the PC Gamer footage, but Capcom doesn't list him as a formidable foe in that particular segment of the official website. That's strictly reserved for boss characters, which, might I add, is absolutely insane when you consider that Dohatsuten is capable of going toe-to-toe with Musashi, since he's capable of doing his own version of Blade Barrage and can even absorb souls. Here's what the website description has to say about him: a Genma that overpowers its enemies with swift movement and deft blade work. It's strengthened further with every soul it absorbs and every drop of Musashi's blood that stains its sword. The fact that he gets stronger with souls and damage he deals to Musashi is also really interesting, and I have a feeling that this enemy in particular is going to be one that knowledge checks you and will filter out players that don't take advantage of the abilities available to them. Even director Nihei in the Spotlight emphasizes that seasoned players of action games will have something to look forward to, especially when playing the game on action difficulty. And speaking of difficulty, let's talk about the other boss, Rasho-gan, and the new location that he's featured in, Yasui Konpiragu Shrine. Before we go over the trailer itself, there's a few things that I'd like to go over. Starting with the new location, the website has the following to say: a shrine renowned for its power to both sever and bind fates. The Genma and Malice's influence has given the shrine grounds the aura of a vibrant paradise, but one that veers into the uncanny. And just like the description mentions, this area is very vibrant, especially when compared to some of the other locations we've seen so far. I'd also like to point out that I have taken a look at some real-life pictures of the shrine as it looks today, and I can clearly see where they may have gotten some inspiration for Byakwe's design. Anyway, regarding the new boss, this is the description that we're left with: a cunning Genma who has brought harm to many at Yasui Konpiragu Shrine under the guise of answering their prayers. He employs threads extended from his body to launch devious surprise attacks. In the gameplay that's been shown off, we can see that those threads are following him around as he moves throughout the boss arena, and one thing that I think many of you have already noticed at this point is that the threads are very similar to the ones that the Onimushi have, so there might be some connection between the two. Also, in the GameSpot preview of this boss fight, there's a quick look at the weapon wheel, and something that immediately caught my eyes, which is something that I've mentioned earlier on in the video, is that we have a total of 6 Oni weapons in the game. We don't know what the other 3 weapons are, but I can confirm that the Oni bow doesn't count in this roster, and how I know this is that because aside from the fact that Game Informer has a screenshot associated with a recent article they did on the game that shows that to be the case, we have several videos from other news outlets where they got to play the game behind closed doors and showcase some B-roll footage, and they did show the bow in action, which did confirm that the bow is a separate thing. Additionally, I think I may have caught on to a running theme with each Oni weapon. When looking at all of the weapons, they're dual something. So for example, the two Celestials are dual daggers, the Earthshakers are dual hammers, and the Wind Whipper is a dual-bladed Naginata. I think that the other three weapons will not only share that specific trait, but will also follow a similar pattern when it comes to the size of the weapons themselves. You may have noticed that the two Celestials and Earthshakers are small weapons while the Wind Whipper is a polearm, so my theory is that two of the weapons will be medium-sized weapons while the final weapon will be some kind of polearm as well, which is an interesting way to vary up the weapons, unlike past games. Keep in mind, this isn't including any potential Bishaman or ultimate weapon which might not follow this pattern in particular. With the Severing Fates trailer, it opens up with Musashi standing and watching a woman praying to Rasho-gan, who says, "Joining or severing, which do you want then? I wonder." It then cuts to some traditional Japanese style of artwork, and we hear Shizuka say, "Musashi, this shrine is set to grant the binding and severing of fates to its pilgrims, but," to which Musashi responds with, "but the malice has messed it up." And as he says that, we see the shrine visually transform from what it normally looks like from the outside at least. We then cut to a shot with some dolls, and we hear that woman from earlier saying before, "I'm made to practice as shamisen every day, and the mistress scolds me awfully when I play wrong. Please, I don't want to practice any longer." We get a close-up of Musashi's face, and you can see that he doesn't like what's going on. And then it cuts to Rasho-gan jumping out from the smoke trying to attack Musashi, but he's able to catch Rasho-gan's sword with his bare hands. You can actually get a quick glimpse of those threads that are attached to Rasho-gan before Musashi catches his sword as well. We get more gameplay footage of the boss fight, and we can hear Rasho-gan say the following: "As for you, I suppose you're here about that gauntlet." The trailer goes back to the cutscene where we see some strange force pulling Musashi towards Rasho-gan before it goes back to the gameplay, and then we hear Musashi say, "I'm fighting monsters like you to keep my limbs attached." And after he performs a break-isen and lands said attack, it goes back to the woman, and we hear Rasho-gan say, "Let's sever your fate," implying that he's cut her hand, or at the very least her fingers, before it goes back to the boss fight. We hear Rasho-gan continue by saying, "Who answered their prayers?" That's right, me, and we see some of the things that he's capable of doing, like flying around the boss arena and using various parts of the environment against Musashi. The trailer cuts to someone else speaking to Musashi, and he says, "Miyamoto Musashi, I deem you worthy of my will and entrust it to you," and this is where we get the Oni strength from. I don't believe there's any information on who's speaking, but if you happen to know, please let us know down in the comment section below. That being said, it's clear that this is an Oni warrior who's giving Musashi the power, and one thing that I find very interesting about this portion is that before it cuts to the gameplay, we can see some souls floating around in the cutscene. They have a golden glow with a sort of bluish-green afterglow or trail, and we can see that Musashi is quite surprised about what's happened to his arms here. It then cuts to some gameplay where we can hear Musashi say, "My arms are pulsing, it feels like I could pick up a castle." And we can see in the short clips in the trailer that Musashi can break shields, pick up large pieces of the environment to use as an attack, as well as clear some blocked paths. The trailer finally cuts back to the Rasho-gan boss fight, and Musashi says, "I'm sick of this crazy Genma's tricks," and before it ends, he shouts, "Would you just die already?" And then we see the title screen once more. There is a Curious Cases trailer for Rasho-gan which came out as I was recording this part of the video, but it literally goes over all of the same information with nothing new or significant to go over. However, the Curious Cases trailer for Musashi, on the other hand, has a little more going for it. The trailer opens up with Musashi talking about the path of the sword. This portion in particular isn't really new though, it's mostly going over an early part of the game that we've seen before. I will say that if you've downloaded the PC benchmark tool for the game, this scene does get a little more context, and it does tease a character by name that you'd recognize if you're familiar with Japanese history, especially around Musashi, or if you watched the Onimusha Netflix anime. The reason why I'm not going over the benchmark is mostly because outside of that part, it really doesn't have anything significant to go over. Anyway, the trailer continues by showing us the character render for Musashi, and we get a line here where he says, "I don't want this filthy power." Now, after we hear that, there is some narration by Shizuka's voice actor describing Musashi and his story in this game, which we've heard beforehand. The main thing here is that we have a few more shots of gameplay in some new areas we haven't seen before, and we also have a cutscene associated with the line Musashi gave about how fighting the Genma wasn't the path he had imagined taking, but it's one that might be worth his while. We also get an additional line where he says, "If you live by the sword, fighting is everything." To put it simply, I'm in because it sounds like fun. It's ironic that he also repeats what Ono says here at some point. That's the most significant thing within this trailer, and that leads us to the Curious Cases trailer for Kojiro. And a similar deal to the previous trailer where we cut to the render of the character and we can hear him say, "Let's go Musashi," before it cuts to the narration. Now, in this trailer's case, we do get some additional context around Kojiro. Shizuka says, after their duel at Kiyomizu-dera Temple, Sasaki Ganryu, wanting greater power, engages in illicit Oni gauntlet practices and slowly descends into madness. And this is where we get some more context in their duel in the rain. We hear Kojiro say, "Every human soul I take feels better than the last. It's incredible. I've never felt so good." There's a render for Kojiro from this part of the game that I'll go over in just a moment when we start talking about the notable Oni memos in just a moment, but I want you to keep his sword in mind because there's something interesting happening with it right here. But with that in mind, we're done covering all of the relevant trailers. Technically speaking, there is another trailer called the Legend of the Onimusha trailer, but the only relevant thing there is that we get a glimpse at the Lesser Nue boss fight. Outside of that, it's mostly dialogue, and while they have added new details to the lore, it's fairly close to what's been established in previous games. Besides, I'd rather you all experience that new bit of lore around this game for yourselves. If there are any other trailers that drop at this point, I won't be covering them because this video has been delayed for long enough as is, and I do think that as we get closer to launch, we are going to be steering closer to spoiler territory. That said, we have a few memos to go over and some screenshots, starting from memo number 45. Ono no Takamura was a real historical figure, but legend has it that he served the imperial court by day and descended into the underworld by night. He is said to have served Enma, the king of hell. In this title, a certain something said to have been used by Takamura to travel to the underworld will make an appearance. What could it be? Those of you familiar with Japanese lore might already have a guess. How exactly will it appear remains a mystery for now. Let your imagination run wild and stay tuned. I'm not exactly sure what item that would be, but my guess is that it would have some relation to either Buddhism or Shintoism. If you have any idea, let us know down in the comment section below. We have a follow-up to this memo with memo number 46. Ono no Takamura, a real historical person who lived during the Heian period. However, in this game, having donned the Oni gauntlet, he remains alive and active right up to the Edo period in which Musashi and his allies lived. Does living for such a long time bring him joy or happiness? Takamura surely has his own thoughts on the matter. The answer might be glimpsed within the game. He is a mentor and also a senior master of swordsmanship to Musashi. At times strict, at times a source of strength, he is an ally who teaches him many things. Director Nihei. The memo is referring to the training grounds where Ono will teach you skills like Blade Barrage or Isins. I'm also really curious about his thoughts on essentially being immortal. Maybe there's a reason as to why he decided to live as long as he has so far in the game, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. Anyway, next we're going to skip over to memo number 49. Sasaki Ganryu, a swordsman also known by the name of Sasaki Kojiro. For those of you who have fought Ganryu in the demo we released last week, were you able to win? I'm sure many of you found it a tough fight. In this post, I'd like to talk about Ganryu's character and fighting style. Ganryu's appeal lies in the way his personality shines through his movements. His attacks combine languid, swaying footwork with feints that seem almost mocking. His unique sense of distance and idiosyncrasies make him a very troublesome opponent when faced for the first time. However, if you observe his movements carefully, there comes a moment where you begin to recognize his rhythm. First, do not rush your attacks. Instead, parry his strikes while assessing him. Then, once you've grasped his quirks, launch a relentless assault. That is the key to defeating Ganryu. Ganryu stands as a rival who repeatedly blocks Musashi's path. Please pay close attention to not only his fighting style, but also the way of life he's chosen. Director Nihei. I definitely agree that his personality in this game will make him stand out a lot as a character, and I am curious if his fighting style will evolve as the game progresses, because the tips that Director Nihei is giving here is strictly for this particular boss encounter. Especially when there's a version of Kojiro that loses his clothing and wields what looks like a transformed version of his Odachi. Personally, I'm not a fan of this pose, and I think they made him look a little too homoerotic here, and it doesn't really fit the character in my opinion, but that's just me. Lastly, we'll skip over to memo number 55. The scorching heat of July continues in Japan. How is everyone keeping? The other day, we traveled to Kyoto for a promotional photo shoot. Walking through places with such deep connections to the game, I was once again reminded of Kyoto's unique charm. I'll be sharing more about that experience in the near future, so I hope you look forward to it. This week, I'd like to introduce Izumo no Okuni, a historical figure closely associated with Kyoto. Izumo no Okuni is widely known as the founder of Kabuki dance. Her costumes were flamboyant and striking, possessing a splendor that captivated audiences at first glance. One of her hobbies is sewing, and she's so skilled that she makes her own bags. In the game, this particular talent may come to life in an unexpected way. How will it be incorporated into the story? You'll have to wait and see. Until then, enjoy imagining the possibilities as you play. Director Nihei. I have a feeling that they're implying that Okuni will make the charms that Musashi can wear throughout the game, and maybe some other variations of the Haori as well. Also, this is a new render of her we haven't seen before. And with that, we've covered just about everything related to news with this game, but we have one more thing to talk about, and it's in relation to Street Fighter 6. Now, admittedly, I would consider myself pretty casual when it comes to fighting games, with the fighting game that I play the most right now being Tekken 8, but I have been interested in playing Street Fighter in general, and I just recently got around to playing it because of this new crossover event with Onimusha. This is not the game that I was expecting Capcom to do a crossover event for, but it is a big surprise, and it really got me to jump into Street Fighter 6 fairly recently. The Way of the Oni Cross Way of the Fist event will let you unlock special EX colors for a limited time, which started from August 7th and will end on August 31st, a few days just before Onimusha Way of the Sword releases, ironically enough, and the colors will be based on various characters such as Musashi, Nobunaga, Gogen Dantis, Soki, and Samanosuke, just to name a few. On top of that, they're including Samanosuke and Jubei's armors respectively for the created characters, so I'm really looking forward to playing the game during the event and hopefully start actively playing Street Fighter more well after the fact. Although I will admit this has me wondering where a crossover event for something like Kunitsugami is at in relation to Onimusha, or even for Neo 3, especially since we just received the DLC expansion Hell Rising on the 19th, but who knows, maybe stuff like that is planned and we just don't know it yet. Anyway, with that all said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. This will be the last trailer breakdown that I do for Onimusha Way of the Sword, unless if we get some DLC or collaboration event well after launch, but what does that mean for all of you who've subscribed over the course of this year watching my content solely for Onimusha? Well, I have some good news for you. I am working on a video that I think you'd be very interested in checking out that's related to games that are similar to Onimusha or would be of interest to fans of Onimusha. I'm not exactly sure when I'll release it per se, since I do have to balance out content creation with work, and that's specifically the reason why it takes me such a long time to get content done. However, with that in mind, I do hope that you'll stick around as the content starts to slow down a bit, since I won't be doing more game coverage for a while, unless if Capcom decides to announce a remaster for Onimusha 3. But until then, I hope you all are looking forward to Onimusha Way of the Sword as much as I am, since it's been a very long wait, and it's kind of surreal to think that it's been 20 years at this point. With that in mind, I hope you all enjoyed again, and I hope I'll see you all in the next one. Matane.